brutal cold driving winds, but the protests continue in Minneapolis.
It's time to move back.
Protesters gathering outside the federal building Friday. ABC News cameras there as federal officials moved in.
Back here in the United States, today marks 1 day since the fatal shooting of Renee Good by a federal agent in Minneapolis, and tensions remain high between ICE agents and local residents, with a growing number of physical altercations being caught on camera, including this one, showing federal agents pulling a woman out of her vehicle as she yells that she's disabled.
That agent suffered internal bleeding, according to multiple U.S. officials familiar with his medical condition. It's been a week since the incident. The White House has said the deadly shooting was an act of self-defense.
Vice President J.D. Vance previously promised absolute immunity to the officer who shot Good. He reposted the new video on X, writing, "Watch this, as hard as it is. The reality is his life was endangered and he fired in self-defense."
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
It's been 1 week since the fatal shooting of Renee Good. We know that the ICE agent involved, Jonathan Ross, suffered internal bleeding to the torso, still trying to parse out just how extensive his treatment was in hospital. We do know that he was seen by doctors at a local hospital last Wednesday and released later that day.
So was the officer seriously injured or not?
Agrees. Donald Trump has said that it's clear that Renee Nicole Good was not just trying to run this officer over, that she actually ran him over. J.D. Vance has promised this officer absolute immunity in this case. Is there any hope of an independent investigation while they're in charge?
The way you put it, it's pretty grim.
Interestingly, in this report from Fox News, they show a stills image of ICE agent Jonathan Ross rather than him actually walking to and from the scene while describing his injuries.
Rural authorities say the agent that shot Renee Good, Jonathan Ross, suffered internal bleeding and had to be taken to the hospital after the shooting. He was released the same day. Ross was seen on video walking in the opposite direction of Good's vehicle.
Don't take my word for it. Don't take their word for it. Watch the video from every single angle. He was not injured. I've seen worse injuries from doing that. And so give me a break. No, he was not ran over. He walked out of there with a hop in his step.
Well, I think it's an exaggeration to say he walked over with a hop in his step, but I think the reality is the agent may have been brushed by the vehicle even quite firmly. There's footage from a different angle where you can see the vehicle brushing him and even hear a thud when it does so. Now, however you want to define brush, whether it's to his hip or whether he has his arm on the trunk of the car, there is nevertheless contact apparently made between him and the vehicle. And so the question is, was he bruised during this encounter? Maybe, possibly. Seriously? But we can't really compare that to be shot in the face multiple times. The ICE officer walked away from the scene. Renee Good didn't. She never left her vehicle alive. And let's also be clear, she was unarmed. And she showed that she was unarmed when you actually see her hand outside the vehicle and her other hand on the steering wheel. You can clearly see she's not armed.
That agent has been receiving threats, is now living in a safe location. It's unclear whether or not he has returned to work either full-time or in an administrative capacity. Typically, ICE agents who are involved in, shootings or high-profile incidents of this nature are placed on leave or...
What did you think was going to happen?
I do think one has to ask, if there are a lot of unhappy people and you use violence like this, what do you think? Does it escalate the situation? And then can you continue just doing what you're doing, business as usual? I mean, beyond the inside of the incident itself, does what the officer did escalate the situation beyond it? And look where we are today. Is the situation escalated and still escalating. Do you think it's a teachable moment where protesters are going to be more accepting of these agents or less accepting? Do you think it's a teachable moment where ICE agents are going to be more accepting and tolerant of protesters or of anyone they come across, or less accepting? Well, what has happened so far? What has happened is that both sides have simply defaulted to their own programming. And that's what I want to discuss in this episode. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button, and let's get started. All right, and this is where things start to get interesting. And so let's deal with my thoughts on programming. Programming is a fascinating and disturbing aspect of criminal psychology, especially when we start to apply it to ourselves and really take on this particular subject matter. And let me be clear, what can start off as innocent can and often does end in tears and tragedy, as we saw with Renee Good. Programming that isn't criminal, if you're not careful and if you're not thinking critically, basically if you're not thinking, can spill over and become criminal. And many of you won't like me saying this, but there's programming on both sides here. Renee Good and her partner were part of an activist group known as ICE Watch. Have a look at this headline. And also this new document shed light on Renee Good's ties to ICE monitoring efforts in Minneapolis. This was part of her programming and the programming she took into the situation. And I can promise you, if you take the programming away, this incident goes away and she gets her life back. There's a lot more to say about this, but suffice it to say, Rashad Rich, a former Southside gym teacher who resigned from the school last month, told the Post that current event topics included the killing of George Floyd. These were apparently regular parts of the curriculum. This is according to the New York Post. And it was that Good would have studied in a group setting. In other words, this idea of law enforcement as unethical, illegal, and unlawful. And of course, if that's your perception, that is your reality.
After two people were shot by a Border Patrol agent. Authorities say the man and woman were affiliated with the Tren de Aragua gang, involved in a recent shooting, and the driver allegedly tried to run them over.
The flip side, of course, is the ICE officer's programming. On the one hand, it's all of the shooting instruction he was giving, his background with the military, and also a recent experience where a vehicle fled the scene and he was dragged with it. That trauma was likely a huge part of the agent's instinctive reaction, but I would say it was an overreaction because of that programming. I mean, think about it. Had you put one of those other officers at the scene in Ross's place, just moved him into Ross's position and simply substituted him with another officer, would they have acted exactly as he had? This was part of his programming and the programming he took into the situation. And I can promise you, if you take the programming away, this incident goes away and she gets her life back. It remains to be seen what sort of consequences await the ICE officer, if any, and even that is a kind of programming. You know, from the top down, basically, guys, we've got your back. If you do something, be strict, be firm, and don't worry, we will cover for you, kind of thing. But even absent legal censure, I'd say he is already experiencing the consequences of his actions in a certain way. I'm sure his routine and his lifestyle have changed drastically since this happened, perhaps forever. Is that what he wanted? If he knew this was going to be the result in the aftermath, would he still have acted the way he did? Would you? And one of the ways we can move beyond our programming is when we think about accountability. When we think, well, if I do act according to my programming, what might the consequences be? And obviously, if you feel like there will be no consequences, then you say, well, great, I can act according to my programming. But are you right about that? And you can refer to standard operating procedure and rules of engagement as well, not only for Ross, but for members of the public that find themselves in a traffic stop. This is the counterweight, the antidote to any extracurricular programming someone or anyone might receive. In other words, what the law says and reasonable conduct, what we in law say the reasonable man would do under any circumstances. That reasonable conduct tends to keep us safe. Programming beyond that often allows us to stray into areas and psychologies that aren't safe. Remember, this wasn't so much a traffic stop, but a private vehicle stopping traffic. In the conventional sense, this wasn't a traffic stop, but actually the opposite. Renee Good's actions stopped traffic and hindered the ICE agent, and then when she wished to leave the scene, they told her not to. At that point, she was no longer technically or legally in a position to disobey what she was being told, but her programming told her she was. It was her programming that led her to obey her wife when she said, "Drive, baby, drive," and not the officers who told her repeatedly to get out of the vehicle. It was her programming that said, "These guys are unethical or whatever, and we are here to disrupt them, so why on earth would you listen to them?" Right, within this context. Now, all of this is disturbing, but in terms of you and me personally, it's really only of academic interest. How about we get practical? How does programming play out practically in real life, in our lives? And if it does, how does it? Here's a very simple illustration of programming overriding reality, in this case, simply the rules of a tennis match.
Let's replay the point.
And this obviously is a contest of different programming, the programming of the ball boy, the programming of the tennis player, the programming of the umpire. The ball boy's programming is to catch balls, and so when a ball is in the air above him, he catches it. He shouldn't, but what happened? His programming takes over. All of this is fair and well, but it really achieves real value when we make it personal. And so I want to encourage you to do that, but I'm going to do it first so that you can sort of feel safe and feel comfortable doing so. And you're welcome to share some of your stories about programming in the comments. Let's deal with the parable of the tropical bliss smoothie. Lately, and when I say that, I mean for the past several months, I've been going to gym with someone, and each time we go, we do, or rather I do the same thing. It's a pattern. We enter the gym, and then before we enter the pool area, I order the two of us smoothies. And then after the swim workout, we collect them and sort of drink them on our way out the door. Each time it's two smoothies, the same smoothies for the same two people, paid for with the same card at the same counter at a similar time of day. So one day, last week actually, because we had a triathlon approaching and we were tapering, which means training less in preparation for the event, I figured since we were going to do an abbreviated session, so we could have lunch and drinks together afterward, there was no point in having something to drink and then having something to drink again, which you would order at the restaurant. So this time I walked ahead of my companion, didn't order anything, only to find after the workout, here's my companion sitting in the gym lounge with two smoothies, as per usual, except I hadn't ordered them. So I asked, "Did you pay for these?" Answer, "No." Do you see what happened? I had programmed everyone around me in this simple scenario, and so even when I didn't order smoothies, they were still made as if to order, even without paying, even without a receipt. And what this shows is how perception can override reality. Even though there was no evidence that I had actually done this, people were acting as though there was. Even though I walked in front of my companion into the pool area, it's not as though he didn't know what had happened. He saw me walk in front of him. He saw my actions. And my companion saw me not order anything. His programming made him assume, I guess subconsciously, that I had when I hadn't, and it wasn't just him. The staff behind the counter assumed I had as well. But that wasn't reality. That's perception and programming making you see reality, and let's face it, a reality that sort of suits you. How it applies here, well, Renee Good, who she is and how she's programmed, isn't just a matter of being part of an anti-ICE group. It's also her politics, her identity, and we can see precisely how and why she's part of a particular group and how and why this is reinforced. The trouble is, when she finds herself in a tricky situation, is she able to think critically? Is she able to think carefully and think practically, think above all, beyond her programming? There's a saying, can you rise above your raisin, right? Now, because arguably to have done so would have meant listening to the officer and getting out of the vehicle. Sometimes it's difficult and it's something we don't want to do. It's discomforting to step out of our programming, because it's a kind of a comfort zone. It's a psychological comfort zone. Ironically, the fact that her partner was already out of the vehicle is likely why she lived and Good didn't. Make no mistake, and I don't think it's a huge surprise, ICE agent Jonathan Ross had completely different programming and different politics. And I think the one word that is not really being mentioned here was the thing that was sort of ringing in his ears during this particular encounter.
Lesbian! We're all thinking it, aren't we? I'm not. Okay? Yes, we're all thinking it, right?
And what does that reference, "we're all thinking it," refer to? Well, our programming, your programming, my programming. What are we all thinking about? And so in terms of Jonathan Ross, together with the traumatic experience of being dragged, it basically meant it came down to the same thing. If he found himself in a tricky situation, was he going to be able to think critically, think carefully, and think practically about it? Was he going to think at all above and beyond his programming? And what did his programming say about someone who's possibly homosexual? Where did they fit in terms of his programming, in terms of his politics? In the friends category, my people category, or the enemies sort of category? And another aspect to his programming is he seemed to be programmed to solve a problem by shooting at it. That was what he did a lot. He was a shooting instructor. So I've identified an enemy, and how am I going to solve the situation? Could he have, or should he have, risen above his programming and done something else? Obviously, programming isn't just how I see the world, it's how a programmed world sees me as well. And if both sides are programmed and both sides are at cross purposes, how else can a confrontation be resolved other than through escalation and violence? This is why critical thinking is such an important antidote to programming. And that is why on this channel I try and encourage people to deal with metacognition, which is thinking about thinking. It's the awareness and understanding of your own or someone else's thought processes. It's rising above the trees of your own thinking and the thinking of other people, and seeing the woods and trying to see the whole system in a particular context, and also where is this going to take us? In other words, we're trying to get a global sense of whether this is good for us, whether as a community, as a collective, but also as individuals. How often do we think beyond our own sensibilities? And I would suggest that we need to be doing that more often. Think about it in a more global sense, like where is this going? And that brings us to B, mass hypnosis. Now remember, I also made a reference in my first video to whether you've watched all 5 seasons of Stranger Things. And some of you may have rolled your eyes at that. Why is he talking about that? Why did I make that reference? Well, if you've watched that series, you may have picked up that the kids in the story basically are a law unto themselves. The very young kids, the teenagers, and then even the parents, Joyce and Hopper, they do things without their parents' permission. They flout law enforcement. Even the chief of police eventually joins them in their crusade. By the end of it, they're even taking on the military. Do you agree that Stranger Things has led to a kind of mass hypnosis? So how about we apply some critical thinking to a cultural phenomenon, the most successful show on television, but also a show that has shaped in some ways our psychology and our programming? It might seem obvious within the conceits of that story that they are the good guys and they, more than anyone else, know how to face and fight the evil they are dealing with. But in reality, they kill a lot of soldiers on their way to defeating evil. And that show has been mighty popular in America and around the world, but in America in particular. And what does it essentially teach its audience is that we can be superheroes, but also we have to solve our own problems. We have to take the law into our own hands. Now, think about that message in a certain context. It's quite subversive. Is it correct? And if we do follow it, what can actually happen? And in Stranger Things, it often includes the use of lethal force when someone gets in the way. Let me reiterate.
These violent delights have violent ends.
As far as I know, it isn't standard operating procedure if someone leaves the scene to shoot them, to kill them. It may seem moral and it may seem right and good within the programming of Stranger Things, but in the real world, killing even a single person for whatever reason and on the way to defeating whatever evil is against the law. That fictional world is fun of Stranger Things, but it's not real. And within all the 80s nostalgia and fun and magic and camaraderie, it's tempting to think we can take the law into our own hands. By the way, in the Stranger Things mythos, there's also the sort of a homosexual narrative is quite a strong aspect to that, and one wonders whether Renee Good was caught up in that as well, and her partner, and whether that was a significant part of their programming or not. It would just be interesting to know. And it does seem as though the tide is turning, that sentiment is shifting in terms of the programming. If we think about the overarching thinking associated with this case, look at this post from Dan Bilzerian, and you can look at his profile on X. I don't believe the ICE agent's life was in danger. Do you agree with that? I think he went into the interaction angry and it was a bad shoot. Do you agree with that? I don't care if she was a blue-hair liberal. This isn't about the right and the left. Do you agree with that? This is about government tyranny and overreach. Do you agree with that? I don't trust the government. And that's kind of the bottom line here. Is the government trustworthy? And if you don't trust the government, does that give you the right to break the law? And I would say no. But by the same token, can the government break the law? And how can the government be made accountable? And this is not just in this situation, it's anywhere. Now, in part 3 to this series, I want to take you into a practical example of a police stop I was involved in that went badly wrong, very badly wrong. And that was a powerful, teachable moment for me, one that I've never forgotten, and maybe one that we can draw some, I don't know if the word is inspiration from, but certainly draw some insight from in terms of this particular incident. Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that. I'd be very curious to hear your thoughts on programming, how it's affected you, how it's affected people around you. So please do let me know in the comments. If you found this analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button, and I'll see you guys next time.